Welcome to the Jayne Avery Show on Lime Bay Radio, where my guests and I explore all things well-being. Today my guest is Margaret Rooke, who started her working life as a human interest journalist. She's been a columnist for the Saturday Telegraph Magazine, contributing editor for Options Magazine and senior feature writer at Woman's Own. Now her time is divided between writing for charities and writing inspirational books for children. Margaret and I share an interest in dyslexia and how we can best help dyslexic children navigate their way through our education system, which in many cases does not cater for the way the dyslexic brain works. When I discovered that 2 of her books were specifically written to inspire dyslexic children to persevere and succeed, I couldn't wait to have her on the show to discuss them. So welcome, Margaret, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So, Margaret, you didn't start your career out writing books to help dyslexic children and their parents. Tell us a little bit about your day job.
Oh, right. So, I work for charities, helping with writing, interviewing people that charities help. And I also write books. I write people's autobiographies, so I do lots of different writing.
Oh, lovely. So you began writing your books on dyslexia when your daughter was diagnosed as dyslexic at high school. This must have come as quite a shock.
It came as I can't tell you how big the shock, because I think partly because I'd never struggled at school in that way. And she had always done very well. She'd done very well at primary school. I just presumed she would carry on doing well, but she stopped learning at secondary school. She just stopped. And we had no idea why that was. We thought maybe she was generally unhappy. We wondered if the school was chaotic, which is what she was telling us. I found, when I was doing some clearing out, I found a poster that she'd made for Anti-Bullying Week when she was in the later years of primary school, and the slogan she'd put on it was "Tell an adult," and she'd spelled adult wrong, and it suddenly clicked. I thought she should be able to spell adult at the age of, I don't know, 10 or 11, and I suddenly realised she was dyslexic. It just suddenly hit me. So so the school got her test, and she was.
And was the school good at supporting her once they realised that she was dyslexic?
They did everything they could. I mean, it was an ordinary comprehensive. There were lots of children there, lots of teens there with far worse problems, I would say. In a London comprehensive, there were people there who'd witnessed dreadful things in other countries and had come over here as refugees. I mean, so it wasn't that she stood out as the person they needed to help, but they did all they could. So they obviously got her extra time in exams, which she couldn't have done without. They allowed her and others with the extra time to take their lessons, their exams in a separate room, which she said was really important, because if they were in the big hall with everyone else and everyone else left after the normal time finished, that was a huge distraction for her that she wasn't able to get over. And in fact, they gave us a session with an educational psychologist, and that was great, because that told me as a parent what to look out for with her and what seemed to be, say, naughty behaviour, but actually wasn't. It was just the way her mind worked.
So how did this naughty behaviour manifest itself?
So once a teacher took something off her and said, "You shouldn't be playing with this in class, I'm going to confiscate that." And she said to the teacher, "Oh, that's okay, it's not my best one." I was really shocked that she said that. But what the educational psychologist explained to me was that is the way that a dyslexic mind can work, just very logically. She just thought very logically, "Oh, it's okay, I don't need that, I've got my other one," you know. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, so I do. Yes, yeah.
It was a sophisticated point for me to take in as a parent, but it made me think that sometimes when she said things to us at home, it was just the way her mind worked. She wasn't being cheeky or disrupting the family or anything like that. So really interesting. Something that had never occurred to me.
That is interesting because, as I've told you, my granddaughter's dyslexic, and she is often what we think of as cheeky. And now you said that, I think it's not always, but actually that we'll have to sort of think about that one, because if that is the way they think, then what did you do to help her? Did you sort of, who had to make the change? Did you explain it to your daughter that she shouldn't reply in those sorts of ways, or did you get the teachers and you to change your attitude to the way she answered you?
I think what I mainly did with that information was to think I need to change my responses to her, and of course when we change our behaviour, our children, our teenagers change theirs.
Yes.
So it just taught me to be calm in different situations that I would have responded in a different way to.
But did she still respond to teachers in a similar way, or were the teachers told that if she answered in that sort of a way, she wasn't being cheeky?
Well, the Senko wrote to them all. That's all I know.
Yes, so they probably did.
I mean, it was a huge comprehensive, and to be honest, I don't know how much difference it made. It may have made a big difference. I really don't know, but I just did what I could do.
Yes.
I think one thing that writing these books on dyslexia taught me was that all the time, I think, as parents, grandparents, people who love children or teens with dyslexia, all the time we have to take a bigger view, really. We have to look at the bigger picture, because I think it's really, really important that everyone works as hard as they can at school, because without that you don't have choices. But I think what's also so important is that we constantly look at a bigger picture and see what our children are doing, what our teens are doing, and how that will fit in with their life more broadly. So what I did was, by chance, I found out a book called The Dyslexic Advantage, and that had the biggest impact on me, because it's a book that looks at the dyslexic brain. It was written by professors in America, and they what they did was they showed how different ways how a dyslexic brain can work. And what was absolutely fantastic about this for me was it made me realise that how my daughter was getting on at school wasn't everything. That with each of these different chapters and each of these different descriptions about the dyslexic brain, they showed how you can not fit in with the education system, you cannot excel there, but you can still have qualities that will lead you to a really successful life at work. And with every chapter they gave examples of the sorts of jobs that you might be able to do if you had these particular qualities. So for the first time I saw that dyslexia wasn't just this learning difficulty that would hang over your shoulders all your life. It also gave you attributes that could really give you a successful time in your career. So just as one example, my daughter fitted into their category, which was about 3D thinking. Being able to see things in a different way than most other people, or having that as a positive outlook of dyslexia. And some of the jobs they suggest for someone with that kind of way of thinking included architecture, included window dressing for shops, included being a lorry driver. So different ways that being able to see things in this particular way could lead you to excel in these careers. And in fact, I've spoken to footballers who say that they have this sense of when the ball is going to be passed to them on the pitch. that other people don't have. And that always takes me back to this way of their mind working, and it always makes me wonder if that's what's going on for them.
I think it quite probably is, because once you told me about the Dyslexic Advantage, I went straight and ordered myself a copy, and it's absolutely fascinating, and I realise now that I've definitely got a dyslexic brain. But there was so much in the book that resonated with me, and I think you're right, it can help you think about a different way of being. And in the book, it describes how the dyslexic brain is wired differently to other brains, and how actually, I mean, as the book's called, the Dyslexic Advantage. And although our education system isn't geared for the dyslexic brain can still get on really well. As you say, you can become a really successful lorry driver or a really successful window dresser. So yeah, I agree, it was a really good book. But of course, you then went on, having had this experience with your daughter, to give your daughter something to strive, to give her a feeling of optimism, and that was why you wrote your first book, isn't it?
Yeah, so what I felt very strongly when she had this diagnosis, she was about 13, I thought, I don't want you to think that having been given this label, this is your future, that you are dyslexic, and it means, that there's this label that will keep crushing you down. I wanted to show her and others like her that they could still follow their dreams, make the best future for themselves. So I started writing letters to very successful people who had dyslexia, and I wanted to find out how they managed to achieve the success they did with this label of dyslexia hanging over them. And it was absolutely fascinating, and all sorts of people replied, and I did interviews with the most amazing people, from Dame Darcy Bustle to Theo Paphitis. I mean, all sorts of really, really interesting people. And they taught me so much about how they had achieved what they had, what they'd been through. And some of them had really, really terrible experiences at school. And then how they overcame them, these experiences, and how they've achieved as much as they have. And I have to say that one thing that they almost all had in common, and I think this is interesting because if the listeners to your radio station will all fit in with this category, is that they almost all had an adult on their side who was supporting them and telling them that they were doing their best, they were doing really well, they were not getting the message from a really significant person in their life that they were stupid and there was anything wrong with them. And that really, really helped them keep their level of self-belief. I think we can all be that person in the life of a young person with dyslexia. We can all be there supporting them. Yes, and that book, if people want to get hold of it, is Creative, Successful, Dyslexic. That's right, and it's available everywhere. And there were just some amazing stories in there. So I remember Kelly Hoppen, the interior designer, she said she did really badly at school, but from a really young age, something like 7, as soon as her parents left the house, she would just start moving the furniture around because she just knew instinctively it was in the wrong place. And that's how she taught herself to be an interior designer. And her parents would come home and the wardrobe would be in a completely different place, and I'm sure it drove them mad. Yes. But it's so interesting that she was self-taught. That's how she taught herself. That is amazing. And there's someone who people won't necessarily have heard of, called Nigel Mccreery, who is a writer who wrote New Tricks on TV other very famous TV series. He learnt about literature when he was a lorry driver, listening to the stories on Radio 4. That's how he learnt about literature, because he couldn't read at school, and that's what gave him the inspiration. to start writing. So education is everywhere, and if you're feeling desperate about your children at school or your teens at school who are struggling, don't forget that education is everywhere. It's not just at school.
No, exactly. And I think one of the things that's important to help children who are actually in school at the moment, if they're not finding it easy to read, just having audio books and having, as you say, somebody who is willing them to do well, giving them a strong self-esteem, helping them gain confidence. But also, I think it's important for them to understand how their dyslexic brain is different, so that they understand that they probably do have to put more effort in when they're learning, but it will be worth it in the end because of all these other things that they've got that actually are probably over and above what other people have got, as you say, like the spatial awareness and being able to see things into things that other people perhaps can't. I mean, your daughter is a good example, isn't she? I mean, what did she become in the end?
Yeah, I mean, she decided she didn't want to go to university. She'd had enough of university, and she started designing her own boots. She got some help from the Prince's Trust. She went to China. She set up a supply chain, and she set up her own business. And she's now working for a fashion company, and she loves it. But that whole process, that was her she was educating herself.
Yes.
And going to university would probably have finished her off, actually, because she really felt she'd had enough of educational institutions. What is really interesting to me, as you say, it's so important that children and teens work as hard as they can at school, because that will give them a choice when they're older, if they manage to pass their English and maths especially. But the Dyslexic Advantage organisation surveyed a group of people with dyslexia in America who defined themselves as successful, and they said, what do you think has made you successful? And by far the majority said focusing on our talents, not trying to make good the things we're deficient at, like, say, our spelling.
Yes.
And the people I interviewed for Creative Successful Dyslexic, a lot of them explain ways that they managed, that they focused on their successes, like Zoe Wanamaker, the actress. So she didn't let being dyslexic stop her being an actress, but because she struggled with learning her words, she would find ways of coping. Like she was in that long-running sitcom My Family.
Yes.
She would stick the words to the back of a frying pan she was holding up and things like that. She found ways of getting by, and even Sir Richard Branson, he just talks about delegating everything he can't do, because and then that leaves him to think of the new ideas. So once you are at the world of work, and I'll tell you, kids with dyslexia are amazed that there will come a time they don't have to do exams. That blows their mind.
Yes.
And once you are at that time, then you will hopefully be able to use what you're really, really good at to propel you in your working life and find ways of dealing with the things you've struggled with.
Yes, I mean, it's so true. And of course, obviously, not all dyslexics will become rich and famous. And your second book, Dyslexia Is My Superpower, most of the time, gives a different perspective. Please tell us how you came to write it, and how's it different from your first book?
Well, I think in a way, in some ways, it's not different. So I think that the point of my first book wasn't that everyone with dyslexia can become rich and famous, but it was showing that everyone can be the best they can be, no matter what label they were given. After that, the publishers suggested to me that I see what the kids think, basically. That we have an education system created by adults, almost all of whom will probably not have a learning difficulty or a learning difference. And so they said, what do the kids think. And it's so clear that the children, the teens, know what they're good at, they know what their talents are. They talk very clearly about the problems they have had because they have dyslexia, but they also have many ideas about what will help them learn. And in fact, there's a section at the end of the book for teachers and parents to say, this is how we learn best. One thing that always makes me smile is Neil Alexander Passé, who is a SENCO, a special educational needs teacher, who also writes books on dyslexia. We were talking once about how a higher than average amount of people who are dyslexic are architects, and a higher than average amount of people with dyslexia are in prison. So he said, how do you make sure your child is an architect and not a prisoner? And the answer to that, I'm afraid, is very, very boring, but it's very, very important, which is that you judge your child on their effort and not what they achieve.
Absolutely.
And you behave in that way, and that you praise them for all the effort they put into something. And I think anyone reading my book can see how much effort they're putting in, and all the ways they're suggesting that they could put even more effort in. However, sorry, I'm talking a lot.
That's all right, it's really interesting.
From my first book, having spoken to all those really well-known people, really successful people, I can tell you that so many of them misbehaved at school. They played truant, they started fights, they gazed out of the window. Zoe Wanamaker said, I was away with the fairies. You know, all of that a teacher looking on might think that's terrible behaviour. That's what they were doing to avoid, because they were dyslexic, because the education system didn't suit the way their brain worked. And it really didn't mean they weren't clever. They were really clever.
Yes.
They were really clever. They were really talented. They were part of a system that wasn't working for them.
No, exactly. And I think that's why I think it's so important to get an early diagnosis if you possibly can, and then explain to the child, you are not stupid, you have just got a different wiring in your brain, and if we can find the best way that you can learn, then it might take you longer and it'll be harder work, but it's something to be more proud of at the end. And one of the things, as you were saying with your daughter and the fashion, my granddaughter's 8, so obviously she will change her mind over the years, but she is really good at cooking. Although she's not very, good at learning to read particularly, she can cook a sponge cake without even looking, she's amazing. So that is something that we can take, that she is good at, and now that something else might develop later along, but at the moment that is something that she's brilliant at. Amazing.
And anything like that, I would say, if you're a parent for someone who is struggling at school, whether they're dyslexic or not, just find these things that make them good about themselves and bolster them and encourage them, because it's so important that they carry this message inside them that they're not someone who fails.
Yes.
Yeah. They may find lots of things at school difficult, and if there's any way of getting them one-on-one help, that can really help them, because what they need is someone teaching at their pace, and what that so often doesn't happen at school when you're in a class of people working at different speeds. And if you're really struggling, a lot of it is going to feel like a foreign language to you. So there are ways that we can try to help our children, and some parents are able to do that themselves with their children. A lot of children say no to that. There are different ways of helping. There's different ways of that teachers can use, and in fact, there are. If you go into Google, there's all sorts of different ways that teachers can help children with dyslexia that can be found. So I would say explore. Teacher training doesn't have nearly enough time given to to children with dyslexia, which is crazy. It's just crazy.
Yes, although when I first started teaching, dyslexia wasn't even recognised. Anybody that mentioned dyslexia was thought to be sort of off with the fairies.
Yes, absolutely.
Eventually, I was able to get once dyslexia was recognised, I got the dyslexia diploma. But and one of the things I've also very much felt, having taught lots of dyslexic kids, is there is no one type of dyslexia as such, and each child has their own thing that they're going to find helps them the most. I mean, I know when we were talking earlier, you were saying about with your daughter that when you were helping her at home, at first she refused it, but eventually she accepted it.
Well, I because I know her so well, I saw we were trying to desperately trying to get her through her GCSEs. I saw when we were reading through a page on science, the moment she distracted and she couldn't cope with it anymore, and so I paused. I let her have that moment of distraction and I said, "Are you ready to read it again?" So we would try and read it again and try and take it in that way. But a teacher in a classroom isn't ever going to be able to do that. You know, that's far too much to ask of them. So, yeah, it's a tricky one because you can't. Home should not be a place where you're forced to do loads of extra work you don't want to do.
Exactly.
So it's a difficult
It is,
balance.
because I think with dyslexic children, they have so much, they put an awful lot of effort when they're actually in school. They need more downtime when they get home, and yet they're expected to do this extra work. It's such a tricky balance, isn't it, between trying to help them. I mean, in that book, the Dyslexic Advantage, they were saying that it's sort of like the square root, so that, you know, if it takes somebody 2 days to learn something, a dyslexic's going to take 4, and it goes on doubling up more and more as the time goes on. So it really is a lot of hard work for them. The other thing that I found interesting in the book was the fact that dyslexic children need the whole picture, and they need more to be told exactly what it is they're going to be learning, because they're not very good at specific detail. So they're not very good at learning little bits as they go along. They actually need an umbrella description before they actually start learning, which I think doesn't help anybody really.
That's really interesting, because my daughter only let me help her just as she was about to do really badly in her GCSEs. And I think that's because she suddenly had the whole picture, that those individual bits of information were of no interest to her until she could see the whole picture was she needed a future. So, yeah, no, it does make sense.
It does, yes. And as I say, I mean, and the thing is, what I find quite irritating, if I'm honest, is the fact that because education has been so much going along the sort of the fine detail route, I honestly think most people would learn better if they knew where they were going to start with. I mean, there's no point sort of starting on a little journey before you know where you're trying to get to. Anyway, I think we've actually probably come to the end of our conversation, haven't we? So, really, what we are saying, if we summarise, how would you summarise that we can help dyslexic children to develop the confidence, the self-motivation and the belief in a bright future?
Gosh, well, I think whatever label you're given, you are more than that label, and it's very easy to put someone in a
box.
Yeah, you're putting someone in a box, and there's always more to someone than that they are struggling to spell and struggling to read and struggling with punctuation. There's so much more.
Yeah.
I think we as parents need to remember that, because children will see how we're reacting to them, and all of us should try and step away from the ghastly level of competition there is in schools. Competition to do well in SATs, competition to read chapter books first, whatever is going on. step away, look at your own child, see what they excel at, separate from all of that, and just be the person behind them, cheering for them and waving their flag, and then watch them fly.
Yes, I think one of the things that you said to me as we were walking up towards here about what we really want for our children is for them to get a job that they enjoy, meet somebody that they love, and have a happy life.
Yeah, to be as contented as they can possibly be.
Exactly.
And have great friends. And I think it's only when you're outside of the whole of the education system you realise that that's actually what you want in life. You just want them to have a satisfying and contented life, and that has got nothing to do with what they got in their SATs actually.
No, exactly. Yes. So, well, I think, we could probably carry on talking about this for ages, but it's been really lovely having you here, Margaret. Your third book.
Yes, that's called You Can Change the World. That's a book for teenagers, really to change the way teenagers are viewed, and to show how many incredible things that teenagers achieve, both for themselves and in their own lives, and in their communities and in the wider world. So we don't just see them as troublemakers or any of that nonsense.
Yeah. So lovely. So perhaps you could come in and talk about that another time.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gosh, I found that fascinating. It was so lovely having Margaret in the studio to talk about this. I hope you gained more of an insight into what it's like to be dyslexic and how much more effort it takes for a dyslexic to grasp seemingly simple concepts. Not because they're stupid, but because their brain is geared to learn in a different way. They should be encouraged and their quirky ways of doing things embraced. Remember, Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci and Richard Branson are all examples of how amazing a dyslexic brain can be. All that's left for me to say now is I'll be back again next Wednesday morning at 11:30 with another guest and another wellbeing topic. Until then, take care and think happy thoughts.